The first time my family asked me to apologize for something I didn't do, I thought they were confused. The 10th time, I thought maybe they just needed time to understand. But after years of hearing the same story repeated over and over, I realized something painful. They didn't misunderstand what happened. They had decided who I was, and they had built an entire family story around that decision. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 38 years old when I sat across from my mother, my brother, my sister, and several relatives in a private room at the country club where my father used to hold business dinners. The same room where I had once been treated like a daughter who mattered. That day, I was treated like a problem that needed to be solved. My mother Linda folded her hands on the table and looked at me with the same disappointed expression I had seen since I was a child. "Claire, we're not here to attack you," she said. "We're here because everyone deserves the truth." I almost smiled when she said that, because the truth was exactly why I was there. For years, my family had told people that I abandoned my father when his business was falling apart. They said I walked away when he needed me most. They said I was too proud to admit I was wrong. My brother Daniel repeated that story so many times that even relatives who barely knew what happened started believing it. And my father died with that story hanging between us. But what they didn't know was that I had something sitting inside my bag that could change everything. An old phone. A saved voicemail. A piece of the past they never expected me to find. Daniel leaned back in his chair and looked almost comfortable. "You know what everyone wants, Claire," he said. "They want you to finally admit your part in what happened." For years, that sentence would have destroyed me. That day, it didn't, because I knew something they didn't. The truth had a voice, and in a few minutes, they were going to hear it. Before I continue, if you enjoy emotional stories about family, betrayal, hidden truths, and moments where people finally find their voice, make sure you subscribe. These stories are about more than conflict. They are about the quiet moments when someone decides they are done carrying a burden that was never theirs. Now, to understand why that voicemail mattered so much, I need to take you back. Because the truth about my family didn't begin in that country club room. It started years earlier. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Chicago, in a home where appearances mattered almost as much as emotions. My father, Michael Bennett, was the kind of man people respected. He owned a small business that he built from nothing. He worked long hours, shook hands with customers, remembered employees' birthdays, and believed that reputation was everything. My mother, Linda, cared deeply about what people thought of us. She wanted the perfect family, the perfect holidays, the perfect photographs, the perfect story to tell everyone outside our front door. I had an older brother named Daniel and a younger sister named Rachel. Growing up, everyone knew Daniel was special. At least, that was how my family made it feel. Daniel was confident, outgoing, and naturally good at making people like him. When he walked into a room, people noticed him. I was different. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the daughter who checked whether bills were paid, whether appointments were scheduled, and whether everyone had what they needed before thinking about herself. As a child, I thought that made me valuable. I thought being dependable meant people would appreciate me. I was wrong, because in my family, being dependable slowly became the reason people expected everything from me. When I helped, nobody noticed. When I succeeded, it was considered normal. When Daniel struggled, everyone gathered around him. They called him ambitious. When I struggled, they called me sensitive. I remember one family dinner when I was 24 years old. I had just received a promotion at work, and I was excited to share the news. My father smiled. "That's great, Claire," he said. Before I could even enjoy that moment, Daniel interrupted. "Dad, remember that marketing idea I had for the business? I think we should finally invest in it." Suddenly, the conversation changed. My promotion became a quick announcement. Daniel's idea became the center of the night. My mother spent the next 30 minutes talking about how creative and talented he was. I sat there quietly, pretending it didn't hurt. That became the pattern. Daniel was the dreamer. I was the helper. Daniel was forgiven. I was expected to understand. I didn't hate my brother. That's the part people often misunderstand. I loved him. I wanted him to succeed. But I slowly realized something painful. In my family, Daniel's success made everyone proud. My success only made them comfortable. They knew I would always be there. They knew Claire would answer the phone. Claire would help. Claire would fix things. Claire would stay quiet. And for a long time I did. Because I thought family meant accepting anything. I thought love meant proving you were useful. I didn't know then that the same quality they depended on would eventually become the thing that saved me. Because years later, when my father's business began falling apart, everyone needed someone to blame. And my family had already decided who that person would be. Me. The first time I truly understood my place in my family was not during a major argument. It was during a small moment that most people would have forgotten. But I never did. My father's business was struggling, and everyone knew it. The numbers weren't as strong as they used to be. Customers were changing. Expenses were increasing. The company needed careful decisions. I was working in corporate compliance at the time, and part of my job was identifying risks before they became bigger problems. I knew how to read reports. I knew how to notice patterns, and when I looked at my father's business records, I saw things that worried me. I noticed missing documentation. I noticed financial decisions that didn't make sense. I noticed that some choices being made were emotional instead of practical. And the person making most of those choices was my brother Daniel. I didn't want to accuse him. I didn't want to create conflict. I just wanted to protect my father. One evening, I sat with my dad in his office. The room smelled like old coffee and paper. He was sitting behind his desk, looking exhausted. "Dad," I said carefully, "can I ask you something about the business?" He looked up. "Of course." I opened the folder I had prepared. "I think there are some things we should review." His expression changed slightly, not because he was angry, because he was tired. "Claire," he said, "is this about Daniel?" I hesitated. "Yes." He leaned back in his chair, and before I could explain, he sighed. That sigh hurt more than anger would have, because it told me he had already decided what I was doing. "You always think you know what's best," he said. I remember sitting there feeling confused, because I wasn't trying to control anything. I was trying to help. "I'm not saying Daniel doesn't care," I told him. "I'm saying mistakes are happening, and we need to address them before they become serious." But my father didn't hear concern. He heard criticism, and that was when Daniel's version of me started spreading through the family. He told my mother that I was jealous. He told relatives that I thought I was better than everyone because I had a corporate job. He said I was trying to take control of my father's company. The most painful part was that people believed him without asking me. My mother called me one night after speaking with Daniel. "Claire, your brother is under a lot of pressure," she said. "So am I," I replied. There was silence. Then she said something I would never forget. "You always make things harder than they need to be." That sentence stayed with me, because I realized something. In my family, peace didn't mean honesty. Peace meant nobody challenged Daniel, and I was the person who kept disturbing that peace. Over time, I became the family scapegoat. If there was tension, somehow my name appeared. If someone was upset, someone would mention something I had done years earlier. If Daniel made a mistake, there was always an explanation. "He's trying. He had pressure. He didn't mean it." But when I made a mistake, it became proof of my personality, proof that I was difficult, proof that I cared too much about being right. I remember helping my parents pay a medical bill when my mother needed treatment. She thanked me. But a few weeks later, when Daniel needed money for another business idea, everyone acted like supporting him was an obvious responsibility. Nobody questioned whether he deserved help. Nobody asked whether he had learned from his mistakes. They simply believed in him. I started noticing that my family didn't call me because they missed me. They called because they needed something. A ride, advice, paperwork, money, a favor, a solution. But when I needed emotional support, the phone somehow became very quiet. The hardest moment came when my father finally stopped speaking to me. It happened after another argument about the business. Daniel had convinced him that I was trying to embarrass him. My father looked at me and said, "Maybe you should stay away for a while." I waited for someone else in the room to say something. My mother, Rachel, anyone. Nobody did. I walked out of that house carrying a pain I couldn't explain, because losing an argument was one thing. Feeling like your own family had already chosen someone else over you was something completely different. For years, I wondered if I should have fought harder, maybe explained better, maybe found the right words. But eventually, I understood something. The problem was never that I didn't explain myself clearly. The problem was that they were comfortable with the version of me they had created. And once people benefit from misunderstanding you, the truth becomes inconvenient. So I stopped trying to convince them. I stopped begging for them to see me differently. And instead, I quietly built a life they knew nothing about. After leaving my father's business situation behind, I focused on my own career. At first, I was simply trying to survive emotionally. I needed distance. I needed space. I needed to remember who I was outside my family's opinion of me. My work became that place. I had always been good at noticing details. I could look at a process, a report, or a system, and immediately see where something could go wrong. Over the years, that skill became my career. I moved deeper into corporate compliance and risk management. I worked with companies that needed help finding financial weaknesses, improving systems, and preventing problems before they became disasters. The same thing my family criticized me for doing became the reason professionals trusted me. But I never told them much about my success, not because I wanted to hide it, because I was tired of having my achievements compared, minimized, or turned into another argument. My family still thought of me as the daughter who walked away. They had no idea that I was building a completely different life. They didn't know about the clients who respected my opinion. They didn't know about the promotions. They didn't know that I had become someone who trusted her own judgment. And they definitely didn't know about the voicemail that would eventually force them to face the truth. Because years earlier, before my father stopped speaking to me, something happened that I never expected. My father accidentally left me a message, and in that message was the one conversation my family never wanted anyone to hear. For a long time, I believed the voicemail was the thing that would save me. But later, I realized something important. The voicemail did not save me. I had already saved myself. The voicemail simply proved that I had been telling the truth all along. And during the years when my family refused to believe me, there was one person who reminded me that I was not crazy, selfish, or difficult. Her name was Megan Harper. I met Megan at work about a year after I stepped away from my father's business situation. At that point, I had become very good at pretending I was okay. I could walk into a meeting, give a presentation, answer questions, and appear completely confident. But outside of work, I was exhausted. I had spent years defending myself against people who had already decided I was guilty. Megan noticed things other people didn't. She noticed that I apologized too much. She noticed that I explained myself even when nobody had asked. She noticed that every time someone mentioned my family, my entire expression changed. One afternoon, we were sitting in the office break room drinking coffee after a long day. She looked at me and said, "Claire, can I ask you something?" I smiled slightly. "That depends. Why do you always talk about yourself like you're trying to convince a jury?" I laughed, because I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. "What do you mean?" She put her coffee cup down. "I mean, every story you tell about your family ends with you explaining why you're not the bad person." That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. For years, I had been living like I was constantly on trial. I told Megan everything. The arguments with my father, the way Daniel had changed the story, the way my mother protected him, the way relatives believed things they never personally witnessed. And eventually, I told her about the voicemail, the old message I had saved but never used. Megan didn't react the way I expected. She didn't immediately tell me to expose everyone. She didn't tell me to destroy my family. Instead, she asked one question. "Why haven't you played it for them?" I looked down at my hands. Because I wanted my father to tell the truth himself. Megan's expression softened. "And what happened?" I swallowed. "He never got the chance." That was the hardest part. The voicemail was proof, but it was also a reminder of everything I had lost. After my father passed away, I found myself going through old belongings. Boxes of paperwork, photographs, receipts. Things people usually throw away without thinking. That was when I found the backup from my old phone. I almost ignored it. I had already spent years trying to move forward. But something made me open it. And there it was. A voicemail from my father. The date was from the period when everything had started falling apart. My hands were shaking when I pressed play. I heard my father's voice, older, tired, frustrated. And then I heard something I never expected, Daniel's voice. At first, I thought maybe I was misunderstanding what I was hearing. But I listened again, and again. The conversation confirmed what I had always known. Daniel had made mistakes, serious mistakes, and instead of admitting them, he had created a plan to make me responsible if things went wrong. I didn't listen to the voicemail because I wanted revenge. I listened because I needed to know whether I had imagined everything. I needed to know whether all those years of feeling hurt were based on reality. They were, but even with that proof, I didn't immediately use it. I was still hoping for something from my family. Not an apology, not even an admission, just honesty. That hope lasted longer than it should have. A few months later, my mother called me. I almost didn't answer, but something inside me still hoped maybe things were changing. "Claire," she said, "we need to talk." Her voice sounded serious. I sat down at my kitchen table. "What happened?" She took a breath. "The family thinks it's time we clear the air." Those words immediately made me uncomfortable, because in my family, clearing the air usually meant everyone sitting together, while I was expected to accept blame. I asked, "What exactly does that mean?" She paused. "Everyone wants closure." I looked out the window. The words sounded peaceful, but I knew my family. Sometimes people say they want closure when what they really want is control over the ending. "What does everyone want from me?" I asked. My mother sighed. "Claire, nobody wants to fight. But do they want to listen?" There was silence. That silence answered my question. Still, I agreed to meet. Maybe because a small part of me wanted to believe things could be different. Maybe because I wanted to see my mother without years of anger between us. Or maybe because deep down, I knew this was the moment everything would finally come out. Before the meeting, I contacted Susan Miller, an attorney I had worked with professionally. I wasn't looking for a lawsuit. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I just wanted to know whether the evidence I had was real and whether I was allowed to finally defend myself. Susan listened carefully. She reviewed the voicemail. She reviewed the old documents. Then she looked at me and said something I will never forget. "Claire, the hardest part about this is not proving what happened." I looked at her. "What is it?" She closed the folder. "The hardest part is accepting that some people knew the truth and still chose a different story." That sentence hurt, because I knew exactly what she meant. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at my father's old country club. The location felt intentional. My father used to hold business dinners there, family celebrations, holiday events, important conversations. And now I was returning to the same place where I had once felt like I belonged. Except this time, I knew I was walking into a room where people had already made a decision about me. When I arrived, I saw my mother first. She gave me a small smile, not a warm one, a careful one, the kind people give when they are preparing for an uncomfortable conversation. Daniel was already sitting at the table. A folder was placed in front of him. That immediately told me everything. He had prepared. He had a plan. Rachel was sitting beside him, looking nervous. For a moment, I wondered if she knew what was coming. Then Daniel looked at me and said quietly, "Claire, I hope you're ready to finally be honest." I looked at him. The old version of me would have started explaining. The old version of me would have tried to prove she deserved to be heard. But that woman was gone. I simply pulled out a chair and sat down. Because what Daniel didn't know was that I had not come there to convince them. I had come there because the truth was finally ready to speak. I knew something was different the moment I walked into that room. Not because of the way my family looked at me. That part was familiar. It was the way they looked at each other, like they had already agreed on what the ending would be. For years, I had been the person everyone expected to explain herself, the person who had to prove she was not selfish, the person who had to defend every decision. But that afternoon, I noticed something I had never noticed before. They were nervous. Not because they felt sorry for me, because they didn't know what I knew. My mother sat at the head of the table. Daniel was beside her, his folder perfectly organized. Rachel kept looking down at her hands. A few relatives sat around the room, people who had known our family for years, but had only ever heard one version of the story. Their version. My mother cleared her throat. Claire, we all agreed that this conversation needs to happen. I looked at her. Agreed? She ignored the question. We've carried this situation for too long. Daniel leaned forward. This isn't about blaming you. I almost laughed. Because that was exactly what it was. People rarely announce they are about to blame you. They call it something else. A conversation. A misunderstanding. Closure. A chance to heal. But the result is usually the same. Someone has already been chosen as the person responsible, and in my family, that person was always me. Daniel opened his folder. I think everyone here deserves to hear your side, he said. The way he said it made it clear he didn't actually want my side. He wanted my confession. My mother looked at me. Your father spent his final years believing you abandoned him. Those words hit harder than I expected. Because no matter how much anger I carried, no matter how much pain I had experienced, one part of me still loved my father. I still remembered the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the man who stayed up late helping me with school projects, the man who used to tell me I could accomplish anything, and hearing his name used like a weapon hurt. Daniel continued. Dad trusted us. He needed support, and instead you walked away. I stared at him. There it was. The story they had repeated for years. The story where Daniel was the loyal son. My mother was the heartbroken wife. Rachel was the innocent sister caught in the middle. And I was the daughter who failed everyone. I looked around the room. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody asked questions. Nobody said, wait, what actually happened? They had already decided. Again. My mother looked at me. Claire, we're not asking for anything impossible. I waited. We just want you to admit that you made mistakes. I nodded slowly. Everyone makes mistakes. Her expression changed. Then why is this so difficult for you? I looked at her. Because that was the question I had been asking myself for years. Why was telling the truth so difficult for them? Why was admitting pain treated like causing pain? Why was my silence considered respect, but their silence considered peace? Daniel crossed his arms. You always do this. Do what? I asked. Make yourself the victim. That sentence would have broken me years earlier, but something inside me had changed. I wasn't hearing an accusation anymore. I was hearing proof. Proof that nothing had changed. They still needed me to be wrong. Because if I was right, they had to face everything they had ignored. Rachel finally spoke. Claire, Dad really believed you left him. Her voice was softer than Daniel's. That almost made it worse. Because I knew Rachel wasn't trying to hurt me. She just believed what she had been told. I know, I whispered. The room became quiet. I looked down at the table. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember those years. The phone calls I made that were ignored. The messages I sent that received no response. The birthdays where nobody asked why I wasn't there. The holidays where my empty chair became something everyone accepted. I had spent years wondering what I could have done differently, what words I could have chosen, what explanation I could have given. But sitting there, surrounded by the same people who had judged me, I finally understood. There was no perfect explanation. Because they were not missing information. They were choosing a version of events that protected them. I took a slow breath, then I reached into my bag and placed my old phone on the table. The room changed immediately. Daniel stopped moving. My mother looked confused. What is that? She asked. I looked at the phone, then at them. This is something my father left behind. Daniel's face changed slightly. Only for a second. But I saw it. Recognition. Fear. He knew. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't tell them they were terrible people. I simply said, for years, you told everyone I abandoned Dad. You told everyone I was the reason things fell apart. I looked at Daniel. You told everyone I was selfish. Nobody spoke. But you never heard what happened before that. My mother stared at me. Claire, what are you saying? I placed the phone in the center of the table. I'm saying there is another part of the story. Daniel immediately leaned forward. Claire, don't do this. That sentence told me everything, not because he admitted anything. Because for the first time in years, Daniel wasn't confident. He wasn't in control. He wasn't the person with the prepared explanation. I looked around the room. The same people who had watched me carry blame. The same people who had accepted a story without asking questions. And finally, I said the words I had been waiting years to say. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I paused. I'm here because I'm done carrying someone else's guilt. Then I pressed the button. The voicemail started playing. At first, nobody moved. The room was completely silent. And then my father's voice filled the room. A voice I had not heard clearly in years. A voice that carried the truth my family had spent so long avoiding. The sound of my father's voice filled the room. For a few seconds, nobody reacted. Not my mother, not Daniel, not Rachel, not even me. Because hearing his voice again was more emotional than I expected. I had imagined this moment so many times. I imagined anger. I imagined relief. I imagined finally saying everything I had wanted to say. But when I actually heard him, I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. Because the truth was arriving years too late. The voicemail began with my father sounding exhausted. His voice was different from the one I remembered from my childhood. Older. Heavier. A man carrying stress he didn't know how to explain. Then I heard Daniel's voice. Dad, I'm telling you, Claire is making this more complicated than it needs to be. My hands tightened together. Even though I had heard the recording before, hearing it in that room made everything feel different. Because this time, everyone else was hearing it too. My father responded, Daniel, this isn't about Claire. There was a pause. Then Daniel said something that changed the atmosphere immediately. She always thinks she knows better. My mother looked down. Rachel looked confused. Daniel stared at the phone. My father's voice became sharper. No, she noticed problems because she was paying attention. The room became completely still. That was the sentence I had waited years to hear. Not because I needed my father to defend me, but because I needed proof that I had not imagined my own reality. The voicemail continued. Daniel admitted that he had made mistakes. He admitted that he had ignored warnings. He admitted that he was afraid my father would find out how serious the situation had become. And then came the part that changed everything. Daniel said quietly, if things go bad, everyone is going to blame me. There was silence on the recording. Then my father answered, are you saying you plan to let Claire take the blame? Nobody in the room moved. Daniel's face changed. The confidence disappeared. The carefully prepared expression was gone. Because the truth was no longer something I was explaining. It was something everyone could hear. The voicemail ended. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence was heavier than any argument we had ever had. My mother looked at Daniel. Not at me. At him. And I realized something important. For the first time in years, she was looking at the person responsible. Not the person who was easiest to blame. Daniel cleared his throat. That's not the full conversation. It was the first thing he said. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I made mistakes. Not, I should have told the truth. Just an explanation. A defense. The same pattern. I looked at him calmly. Daniel, you just spent years telling everyone I was dishonest. He avoided my eyes. Claire, you don't understand the pressure I was under. I nodded. Maybe years earlier I would have argued. Maybe I would have listed every sacrifice I made. Every night I stayed awake worrying about my father. Every time I tried to help, every moment I felt abandoned. But I didn't need to prove my pain anymore. The evidence had already done that. Attorney Susan Miller opened the folder she had brought with her. I reviewed the recording and the related documents, she said. Her voice was calm and professional. The timeline matches the financial records from that period. Daniel looked at her. You're not even family. Susan looked directly at him. No, I'm someone who reviewed the facts. That sentence landed harder than anger would have, because facts were exactly what nobody wanted to deal with. My mother finally spoke. Her voice was quieter. Claire. I looked at her. There were tears in her eyes, but I didn't know what those tears meant. Regret? Embarrassment? Pain? Maybe all three. I didn't know, she said. And for years, that sentence would have been enough to make me comfort her. But not anymore, because I had spent years living with the consequences of what she didn't know. I had spent years being judged because nobody wanted to ask questions. I took a breath. Mom, that's the problem. She looked at me. You didn't know because you never wanted to know. The room went quiet again. I wasn't saying it to hurt her. I was saying it because it was true. There is a difference between not having information and refusing to look for it. My mother looked away. Rachel wiped her eyes. I repeated things I shouldn't have. I nodded. I know. I'm sorry. Those words meant something, but they didn't erase everything. And I think Rachel understood that from my expression. Because sometimes an apology is not the end of the story. Sometimes it is only the first honest sentence someone has said. Daniel stood up. This is ridiculous. Everyone looked at him. You're all acting like Claire is some kind of hero because she saved a recording. I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt sadness. Because he still didn't understand. This was never about winning. It was never about making him look bad. It was about finally being seen clearly. I stood up slowly. I don't need to be the hero, Daniel. He stared at me. I just needed you to stop making me the villain. Nobody said anything. Because there was nothing left to argue. The story they had carried for years had collapsed. Not because I shouted louder. Not because I attacked anyone. Because the truth had finally entered the room, and the truth didn't need to fight for attention. It only needed to be heard. In the weeks after that meeting, things changed. Not instantly, not perfectly. Real life doesn't work that way. There wasn't some dramatic moment where everyone suddenly became a different person. But the family dynamic shifted. Relatives who had avoided asking questions started reaching out. People who had repeated Daniel's version of events started admitting they had never heard mine. And Daniel began facing the consequences of something he had spent years avoiding. The reputation he had protected mattered less when people finally saw the choices behind it. The business issues were reviewed properly. Old records were examined. Decisions that had been ignored were finally addressed. There were professional consequences, but they happened because of his actions, not because I wanted revenge. That distinction mattered to me. I didn't want him destroyed. I wanted the truth acknowledged. Because the biggest lesson I learned was this: you cannot build peace on top of a lie. Eventually, the foundation breaks, and when it does, everyone has to decide what they are willing to face. For my family, the truth had arrived, but now, I had to decide something else. Whether knowing the truth was enough to rebuild the relationships I had spent years losing, or whether some doors were only meant to close. After everything that happened in that country club room, I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. The truth coming out was only the beginning. Because when people are forced to face something they have avoided for years, they don't always respond with honesty. Sometimes they respond with discomfort. Sometimes with excuses. And sometimes, they try to make the person who revealed the truth feel guilty for revealing it. That was exactly what happened next. A few days after the meeting, my phone started filling with messages. Some were from relatives who had never contacted me before. Some were from people who suddenly wanted to catch up. And some were from family members who still weren't ready to accept what happened. My aunt sent me a message saying she was sorry for believing things she had never personally witnessed. A cousin called and admitted that she had always thought something felt wrong about the story Daniel told. Those messages meant more than I expected, not because they fixed everything. They didn't, but because for the first time, people were questioning the story instead of questioning me. Then came the messages from Daniel. The first one was simple. Can we talk? I stared at it for several minutes. The old Claire would have responded immediately. She would have thought, maybe this is my chance. Maybe he finally understands. Maybe my family is finally going to change. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had spent years waiting for people to give me permission to feel hurt. I had spent years hoping someone would finally say, "You were right." And I realized something. I didn't need that anymore. Still, I agreed to one conversation. Not because I trusted him, because I wanted to know whether there was any accountability left. We met at a quiet coffee shop near my office. Daniel looked different. Not physically, emotionally. For the first time, he wasn't walking into a room where everyone automatically believed him. He wasn't the confident son explaining the problem. He was just a person dealing with the consequences of his choices. He looked at me across the table. I never wanted things to get this far. I listened, because I had learned that silence often reveals more than arguments. "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked down. "I mean, I didn't think everyone would believe you." That sentence told me everything. Not, "I'm sorry I hurt you." Not, "I'm sorry I lied." He was sorry the situation changed. There is a difference. "Daniel," I said quietly, "for years, you weren't worried about whether I was hurt. You were worried about whether people believed you." He didn't answer, and for once, he didn't have a prepared response. My mother was harder, because my relationship with her carried a different kind of pain. Daniel had created the story, but my mother had protected it. She called me a week later. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Claire, I miss you." Those words hurt, because part of me had wanted to hear them for years, but wanting something and accepting it are two different things. "I miss you too," I admitted, and that was true. I missed the mother I thought I had. I missed the version of my family that existed before everything became about blame and appearances. But missing someone does not mean returning to the same place that hurt you. My mother asked if we could meet, so we did. We sat at a small restaurant on a rainy afternoon. She held her coffee cup with both hands. "I should have listened to you." I looked at her. Yes, it was a simple answer. But it was honest. She started crying. "I thought I was protecting the family." I nodded. "I know. Because I finally understood something. People can hurt you while believing they are doing the right thing. Intent does not erase impact." My mother wanted the family to stay together, but she confused keeping peace with avoiding the truth, and I had spent years paying the price for that. "I don't hate you, Mom," I told her. She looked up. "But I need you to understand something." "What?" "I can forgive what happened and still choose distance." That was difficult for her to hear. I could see it, because some people believe forgiveness means access. It doesn't. Forgiveness is about releasing yourself from carrying anger. Boundaries are about protecting yourself from being hurt again. They are not the same thing. Over time, I created a different kind of family around me. Not a perfect one, a real one. Megan became the person I called when something good happened. The person who celebrated my achievements without comparing them to someone else. The person who never made me feel like love had to be earned. That year, I spent Thanksgiving differently. For years, holidays had felt like performances, everyone smiling for pictures while pretending nothing was wrong. But that Thanksgiving, I sat at Megan's dining table with a small group of people who genuinely cared about each other. There were no perfect decorations, no forced conversations, no pretending, just honesty. And somehow, that felt more like family than anything I had experienced before. Months later, my life looked completely different. My career continued growing. I took on bigger projects. I trusted my own decisions. I stopped checking whether every choice would make someone else comfortable. And I kept the voicemail, not because I wanted to replay the pain, not because I wanted to remind myself that I was right. I kept it because it represented something important. For years, I thought my biggest battle was proving the truth, but I was wrong. My biggest battle was believing myself even when nobody else did. That voicemail didn't give me my voice. I already had one. It simply reminded me that my voice had always mattered. When I think back to that day at the country club, I don't remember the look on Daniel's face. I don't remember the silence after the recording ended. I remember something else. I remember the feeling of finally putting down a weight I had carried for years. I walked into that room expecting to defend myself. I walked out knowing I never needed to, because sometimes justice is not watching someone else lose. Sometimes justice is realizing you no longer need their approval to know your own worth. If you have ever been blamed for something you didn't do, or if you have ever had to fight to be heard by people who should have listened first, I hope you remember this. The truth may arrive late, but it does not become less true because people ignored it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it connected with you, share your experience in the comments. You never know who might need to hear that they are not alone. And if you want more stories about resilience, boundaries, and people finding their voice after being hurt, subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is not fight harder, it is finally choose themselves.